The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto that practice field, something felt off. Not chaotic, not confusing, just decided. Because this was supposed to be a quarterback competition. That's what everyone had been saying for weeks. Analysts, fans, even people inside the building kept pushing the same idea. This was going to be a battle. A real fight for QB1. Multiple names in the mix, multiple opportunities. Nobody guaranteed anything. But then minicamp started, and within minutes, that entire narrative started falling apart. No big announcement, no dramatic build-up, no speech from the coaching staff explaining how things would work. Just one quiet decision. And somehow, that said everything. Shedeur Sanders wasn't easing in. He wasn't rotating with the second group. He wasn't being worked into the system like most young quarterbacks. He walked in and went straight to the first team. Just like that. No hesitation. No debate. And here's the part that really made people stop and look twice. Nobody seemed surprised inside the building. That's what made it different. If this were truly an open competition, you'd expect at least some level of rotation, a mix of reps, a chance for everyone to prove themselves. That's how these situations usually play out, especially early in camp. But that's not what happened here. Instead, one quarterback took the field with the starters, and everyone else just fell in line behind him. No explanation needed. Because when a coach makes a move like that, this early, this clearly, it's not random. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Receivers lined up without question. The offense moved like they already understood who was in charge. There was no confusion, no awkward adjustment period. It looked natural. Like they'd already accepted it. And when something looks that smooth this early, it usually means one thing. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This had been building. Somewhere behind the scenes, before cameras were even rolling, a direction had already been chosen. And now, for the first time, everyone else was finally seeing it. That's why this moment mattered so much. Because it wasn't just about who got the first reps. It was about what those reps represented. They told you where the coach's trust was. They told you who the team was starting to rally around. And most importantly, they told you who was already ahead, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. And once that picture became clear, everything else started falling into place. Because when one player is given that kind of control this early, it doesn't just impact the field, it changes the entire dynamic of the room. Every throw gets watched differently. Every mistake feels heavier. Every opportunity suddenly means more. And for the quarterbacks who weren't in that position, it forces a realization you can't avoid. Because at that point, you're not just competing anymore. You're trying to catch up. And as that reality started to sink in, not everyone handled it the same way. In fact, one reaction in particular began to stand out, and it hinted that this situation was about to get a lot more tense. At first, it wasn't loud. There was no outburst, no confrontation, nothing you could point to and say, "That's the moment everything boiled over." It was quieter than that. But if you paid attention, you could feel it. Because when one quarterback is suddenly leading everything, the other guys in that room don't need an explanation. They understand exactly what it means. And in this case, the shift happened so fast that it left almost no room to adjust. Dillon Gabriel came into this situation expecting a real shot. That much was clear. The buildup around this competition wasn't just media noise. There was a belief that multiple players would get their opportunity to prove something early. But then practice started, and instead of stepping into that battle, Gabriel found himself watching it from the outside. Not officially, not in a way anyone announced, but in a way that was impossible to ignore. Because while Shedeur Sanders was out there taking control of the first team, Gabriel's role looked different. More limited. More distant. And the body language started to tell the story. Nothing dramatic, just small things. The kind of details most people overlook unless they're really paying attention. A longer pause between reps, a quieter presence during drills, less interaction compared to what you'd expect from someone actively pushing for the top spot. Now, to be fair, nobody inside that facility has come out and said anything negative. There's been no official statement, no confirmation of frustration. But from the outside looking in, it seemed like a player trying to process a situation that wasn't going the way he expected. And that's where the tension begins. Because competition only works when everyone feels like they're in it. The moment it starts to feel one-sided, everything changes. Confidence shifts, energy shifts. Even the way teammates respond can start to shift, whether they realize it or not. And that's exactly what made this moment so uncomfortable. It wasn't just about losing reps. It was about how quickly those reps disappeared. One day, you're preparing to fight for QB1. The next, it looks like someone else already has a firm grip on it. That kind of shift doesn't just hit your role, it hits your mindset. And for Gabriel, this wasn't happening weeks into camp after multiple chances. This was happening immediately, before he could even establish rhythm, before he could make a real statement, before the competition even felt like it had begun. Which raises a bigger question. If the opportunity was always there, why didn't it look like one? And if it was, when did that decision actually get made? Because situations like this don't just appear overnight. They build quietly, behind the scenes, long before fans ever get a glimpse. And by the time it reaches the field, it's usually already too late to change it. That's what made Gabriel's position so difficult. Not that he couldn't perform, but that the window to prove it might already be closing. And just when people started to pick up on that tension, something else dropped that made the entire situation even harder to ignore. Because now, it wasn't just about who was getting reps. It was about what everyone could see with their own eyes. Then the footage dropped, and suddenly, this wasn't just speculation anymore. Now everyone could see it for themselves. Clips started circulating almost immediately. Short throws, warm-up reps, nothing overly dramatic on the surface. But in situations like this, it's never really about what is happening, it's about how it looks. And that's where the conversation completely shifted. Because when Shedeur Sanders stepped up, there was a noticeable difference in presence. The ball came out quick. Clean release. No hesitation in the motion. It didn't feel like someone trying to prove he belonged, it looked like someone who already believed he did. Again, these weren't game-winning drives or high-pressure moments, just routine throws. But even in those simple reps, there was a rhythm to it. Confidence you could pick up on instantly. And then the camera cuts, and you see Dillon Gabriel. Left-handed release, slight pause before the throw, a bit more build-up in the motion. The ball still gets there. The velocity is fine, nothing objectively bad about it. But side by side, it felt different. And that's the key word here, felt. Because this isn't about saying one quarterback can't play. That's not the reality. Gabriel is capable. He's had success. He can make the throws. But perception matters more than people like to admit. And in that moment, the perception leaned heavily in one direction. Shedeur looked smooth. Gabriel looked like he was working. That subtle difference is everything when eyes are already locked in, trying to figure out who stands out. And the internet picked up on it instantly. Fans started breaking down clips frame by frame, comparing release speed, arm angles, footwork, turning a few seconds of footage into a full-blown debate. Some said the gap was obvious. Others argued it was overblown. But regardless of which side people landed on, one thing became clear. Shedeur was the one people couldn't stop watching. Even when the reps were basic. Even when the stakes were low. There was just something about the way he moved through those moments that kept attention on him. And that matters more than most realize. Because coaches notice execution. But locker rooms notice presence. And presence is what starts to separate players long before the depth chart ever becomes official. That's why this footage carried so much weight. It didn't just show throws. It showed comfort. It showed timing. It showed who looked settled and who still looked like they were trying to settle in. And when you combine that with what already happened earlier, the first team reps, the immediate positioning, it starts to paint a picture that's hard to ignore. Not a final answer, but a very clear direction. And the more this footage spread, the harder it became to push back against what people were starting to believe. Because now, it wasn't just about assumptions or early reports. It was visual, real, something anyone could judge for themselves. And once people saw it, the conversation didn't slow down. It got louder. Because if this is what things look like at the very beginning, what does that say about where this is headed next? But here's the part almost nobody was talking about at first, and it might be the most important piece of this entire situation. It's not arm talent. It's not highlight throws. It's not even those minicamp clips everyone keeps replaying. It's availability. Because in the NFL, especially in a quarterback room like this one, the most valuable ability isn't how far you can throw or how clean your mechanics look. It's whether you're actually there, every day, ready to go. And that's where things quietly start to separate in a way that doesn't show up on camera. Shedeur Sanders hasn't just looked composed on the field, he's been present. In the building, in the system, around the team, taking reps, absorbing the offense, stacking days together without interruption. That might not sound flashy, but inside an organization, that consistency builds trust faster than anything else. Coaches notice it. Teammates feel it. And over time, it starts to matter more than raw upside. Now compare that to the rest of the room. Dillon Gabriel has dealt with setbacks. Nothing that defines his career, nothing that makes him unreliable long-term, but enough to interrupt rhythm. Enough to slow momentum at the exact moment he needed it most. And timing is everything in situations like this. Because when one player is consistently available and another is trying to regain footing, the gap can widen quickly, even if their talent levels are close. Then there's the bigger situation, hovering over everything. A quarterback room that's already been through instability. Missed games. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Interrupted seasons. Moments where the team needed a leader on the field and didn't have one. That kind of history changes how decisions get made. It shifts priorities. Suddenly, the question isn't just, who's the most talented? It becomes, who can we actually rely on? And when that question gets asked, availability jumps to the top of the list instantly. That's what makes Shedeur's position so strong right now. Not just because of what he's shown, but because of what he hasn't been. Unavailable. Uncertain. Out of the picture. He's been there, every day, taking advantage of every rep, every opportunity, every moment to build confidence with the coaching staff. And in a room where others have had interruptions, whether minor or major, that consistency stands out even more. It's subtle but powerful. Because over time, availability turns into familiarity. Familiarity turns into trust. And trust turns into opportunity. That's how these situations evolve without anyone needing to announce it publicly. And once that process starts, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Because even if another quarterback steps in and performs well later, they're still playing catch-up in one critical area. They haven't been there the whole time. And coaches don't forget that. Especially not in a system that's trying to stabilize after uncertainty. Which is why this isn't just about what we're seeing right now. It's about what's been building quietly behind the scenes. Day after day. Rep after rep. And when you factor that in, the picture becomes a lot clearer. Because this might not be a battle of talent anymore. It might be a decision based on who's been there when it actually mattered. And that realization leads directly into a much bigger issue, the team can't ignore anymore. But to really understand why this moment matters, you have to zoom out. Because this isn't just about a rookie getting first-team reps or a backup trying to climb the depth chart. This is about a situation the Cleveland Browns have been trying to fix for years and still haven't fully escaped. And at the center of that situation is Deshaun Watson. When Cleveland made that move, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't cautious. It was one of the boldest decisions the league had seen in years. A massive commitment. A deal built on the belief that Watson would be the long-term answer. The guy who stabilizes everything. The quarterback who takes them from inconsistent to dangerous overnight. For a moment, that vision made sense. There was a version of Watson earlier in his career that looked like exactly that kind of player. Dynamic, confident, capable of carrying an offense when things broke down. But what the Browns have dealt with since then hasn't matched that version. Injuries disrupted momentum. Time away from the field created gaps that were hard to recover from. And when he did return, the consistency just wasn't there in the way the organization needed it to be. Now, to be fair, none of this is as simple as one player failing or one decision going wrong. Situations like this are layered. There are multiple factors, system changes, timing, pressure, expectations that all play a role. But at the end of the day, the result is what matters. And the result is this. The Browns still don't have a clear, stable answer at quarterback. That's the reality they're dealing with right now. And when a team reaches that point, after investing heavily, after waiting, after trying to make it work, they eventually have to shift direction. Not dramatically, not publicly, but gradually. That's what makes this current moment so important. Because it doesn't look like a dramatic reset. It looks like a quiet transition. Instead of forcing things to work, the organization appears to be opening the door for something new, something younger, something more consistent, something they can build around without the same level of uncertainty. And that's where players like Shedeur come into the picture. Not as a guaranteed replacement, but as a possible solution. A different path forward. One that isn't tied to the past decisions or expectations that have already played out. And once that shift begins, even subtly, it changes how everything is evaluated. Young quarterbacks aren't just prospects anymore. They become real options. Real investments. Real answers waiting to be tested. That's why these minicamp reps matter more than they usually would. Because they're not happening in a vacuum. They're happening in the middle of a bigger organizational decision. A decision about where this team is headed next. And whether they're finally ready to move forward instead of looking back. Because if that answer is yes, then this isn't just about competition anymore. It's about transition. And transitions like that don't happen by accident. They start with moments exactly like this. At this point, calling it a competition feels more like a formality than a reality. Because real quarterback battles don't look like this. They don't start with one player getting a clear majority of first-team reps while everyone else rotates behind him. They don't unfold with one name consistently leading the huddle while the others wait for limited opportunities. And they definitely don't send such a strong signal this early without some level of balance. But that's exactly what's happening here. Inside the Cleveland Browns facility, the structure is already telling the story. You don't need an official depth chart. You don't need a coach to step in front of a microphone and spell it out. Just watch who's running with the ones. Watch who's getting the timing, reps with the starters. Watch who the offense is naturally responding to. That's where the truth always shows up first. And right now, that truth points in one direction, Shedeur. This isn't about one good practice or a single highlight throw. It's about consistency in positioning, the kind that doesn't happen by accident. Coaches at this level are intentional with every rep, especially early in camp. They understand what those reps represent, not just development but trust. So when one quarterback is placed in that position repeatedly, it means something. It means the evaluation process isn't just starting. It's already in motion, and possibly already leaning toward a conclusion. That's why the idea of this being a wide-open battle doesn't hold up under closer inspection. Because if it were truly open, we'd see variation. We'd see rotation. We'd see multiple players getting equal chances to establish rhythm with the first team. But we're not seeing that. Instead, we're seeing structure. A structure that quietly prioritizes one player over the others. And once that structure is in place, it creates a ripple effect throughout the entire room. Timing builds between the starter and the offense. Confidence builds between the quarterback and the coaching staff. Familiarity builds in ways that can't be replicated with limited reps. Meanwhile, everyone else is left trying to catch up without the same opportunities. That's the part people often overlook. Because competitions aren't just about talent, they're about access. Access to reps. Access to rhythm. Access to the moments where trust is built. And when one player consistently has that access, the gap doesn't just stay the same. It grows. Now, does that mean everything is officially decided? Not necessarily. Injuries, performance shifts, unexpected developments, those things can always change the trajectory. But based on what's happening right now, the direction feels clear. This isn't a chaotic, unpredictable battle. It's a controlled progression. One where the coaching staff appears to already know what they're looking for and who they're leaning toward. And that's why labeling it a competition feels misleading. Because competitions create uncertainty. This situation, it's doing the opposite. It's quietly removing it. And as that clarity starts to settle in, there's one more narrative floating around that doesn't quite match what's actually happening inside that building. There's a narrative floating around right now that doesn't quite line up with what's actually happening on the field. You've probably seen it. The idea that the Cleveland Browns don't fully believe in Shedeur Sanders, that they're hesitant, that they're holding back, that, for some reason, they're not ready to commit. It sounds convincing on the surface. But when you actually look at the evidence, it starts to fall apart. Because belief in a quarterback doesn't always come through statements or interviews. It shows up in decisions, in opportunities, in who gets trusted when it matters. And right now, the actions inside that building are telling a very different story than the one being pushed from the outside. Shedeur isn't being hidden. He's not buried on the depth chart. He's not being slowly worked in behind the scenes. He's leading, taking first-team reps, running the offense, setting the tone in a way that coaches don't allow unless they're genuinely evaluating someone as a serious option. That's not hesitation. That's investment. And it's happening in real time, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. Now, to be fair, some of the skepticism isn't coming out of nowhere. Shedeur entered the league with a spotlight already on him. Expectations were high. Opinions were divided before he even stepped onto an NFL field. That kind of attention naturally creates louder criticism, louder debates, and stronger reactions to every single move. So when people say the organization doesn't believe in him, what they're often reacting to isn't internal reality. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. It's external noise, opinions, hot takes, narratives that gain traction because they're controversial, not because they're accurate. And once those narratives start circulating, they can take on a life of their own. One comment turns into a headline. One headline turns into a storyline. And suddenly, people are repeating something that was never actually confirmed in the first place. That's how disconnects like this happen. Because inside the building, the approach looks structured, intentional, and focused. Outside the building, it gets framed as uncertainty. But those two things don't match. And that's the key point here. If the Browns truly didn't believe in Shedeur, their actions would reflect that. He wouldn't be getting priority reps. He wouldn't be leading early. He wouldn't be positioned the way he is right now. Coaches don't operate that way, especially not at quarterback, where every decision carries weight. So while the media continues to debate whether he's the guy, the team seems to be quietly exploring that possibility much more seriously than people realize. And that gap between perception and reality, it matters. Because it shapes how fans interpret every throw, every practice clip, every report that comes out. But once you strip away the noise and just focus on what's actually happening, the picture becomes a lot clearer. This isn't a team holding back. It's a team evaluating, carefully, deliberately, and with a direction that's already starting to show. And when you combine that with everything we've seen so far, one final piece of the puzzle starts to stand out. Because beyond the reps, beyond the narratives, beyond the speculation, there's one trait that separates quarterbacks when the pressure is at its highest, and it might be the biggest reason this situation is trending the way it is. And this is where everything starts to separate in a way you can't always measure with stats or practice clips. Because when the noise fades, when the debates quiet down and the reps stop being scripted, there's one thing that defines a quarterback more than anything else. What happens when the moment gets heavy? Not when everything is clean. Not when it's just warm-ups and controlled throws. But when the pressure hits, the game tightens, and every decision actually matters. That's the space where certain players just feel different. And that's what people around the Cleveland Browns started to notice about Shedeur Sanders. Because even in limited opportunities, there were flashes, not perfect, not flawless, but moments where the situation demanded something extra, and he didn't shrink from it. He leaned into it. There's a composure there that doesn't always show up on stat sheets, a calmness in the pocket, a willingness to keep plays alive just long enough for something to open up, the kind of presence that doesn't panic when things break down. And more importantly, the kind of mindset that doesn't disappear when things go wrong. That matters more than people think. Because every quarterback can look good when the system is working perfectly. Clean reads, open receivers, no pressure. But the real test is what happens when none of that is there. When the protection breaks. When the play call doesn't work. When the defense knows exactly what's coming. That's where you find out who can actually handle the weight of the position. And from what we've seen so far, there's a growing belief, quiet but real, that Shedeur might be built for those moments. Now, that doesn't mean everything is decided. It doesn't guarantee anything long-term. But it adds context to everything else we've talked about. The first-team reps. The confidence in his movement. The trust that seems to be building behind the scenes. It all connects back to this idea that when the pressure rises, he doesn't look overwhelmed. And that's a rare trait, especially for a young quarterback stepping into a situation that's anything but stable. Meanwhile, for the others in the room, the challenge becomes even harder. Because now, they're not just competing on talent. They're competing against perception, against momentum, against a growing sense that one player is starting to separate in the moments that matter most. And once that narrative takes hold, once teammates start to feel it, once coaches start to trust it, it becomes incredibly difficult to shift. Because the NFL isn't just about ability. It's about belief. Belief from the coaching staff. Belief from the locker room. Belief that when everything is on the line, the quarterback under center is the one you want with the ball in his hands. And right now, whether people want to fully admit it or not, that belief seems to be building in one direction. Which brings us back to the question that started all of this. If one player is already earning trust in pressure moments, already leading the first team, already shaping the energy of the offense, then was this ever really a competition at all? Or are we just watching the final stages of a decision that's already been made?
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.